For a medium that's as cool as gaming, video game discussions have time and time again proven to be a stupid waste of time. Partaking in any sort of conversation involving them is like eating Raisin Bran for breakfast. It sounds like a bad idea, but you decide to give it a chance anyway, and you end up realizing that you shouldn't have given it that chance. And then you die! A couple of particular topics of interest rear their ugly heads every now and then, such as the technical state of newly released games, any sort of talk about competitive gaming, bad takes regarding speedrunning, arguments about the prices of games. I mean, they're trying to get $70 from us now, meanwhile $60 is still really pushing it for most titles. I work at Zaxby's, for God's sake. How the hell am I supposed to pay for... Oh, I digress. And there are two special occasions where Twitter will go nuclear. The first is during a presidential election, and the second is for something far more important, and that's when a new Pokemon game is about to come out. But by far, one of the most contentious conversations that pops back up once every few months involves video game difficulty. Challenge has been a part of games for as long as they've been around. Every game has a goal to it, and for said goal to be fulfilling, there must be some sort of obstacle for the player to overcome to reach it. It varies from genre to genre. Some might require technical skill, memorization, or sometimes maybe even just some time investment. And in several cases, all of the above. Games are made to be fun, sure, but in order for a game to be truly engaging, there has to be some sort of test of the player's understanding of it, or risky decision making. Otherwise, the experience could potentially become less investing and more boring, like... I think all of us have those moments where we're like, oh, there's no way that cucumber just hit me! I think this game sucks! I actually threw my phone. It popped out of its protective case too, and I don't know how, but it's still fine. I know I'll never do this again because YouTube doesn't give me enough money to go around throwing phones for gags. But at the end of the day, you gotta remember that all of those questionable cucumber hitboxes make success all the more satisfying. I've gone through so many different video game challenges, and some of them made me really want to tear my hair out in the frustration. And whenever I finally get to the other end of that long, treacherous tunnel, I come out appreciating the game more than ever now that I've come to a better understanding of it. Challenges like that can turn games I liked into games I now love. So, with that settled, now let's talk about why difficulty sucks, and how it's been mishandled, mangled, touched in really inappropriate places, and misunderstood by the general gaming crowd within the past few years. First, however, let's do a little history. A lot of titles from gaming's early years were pretty hit and miss whenever it came to implementing challenge, because unless if you were an American classic such as Super Mario Bros., nobody understood what made for good game design. If you revisit some of these old games, you'll find that a lot of the time it's like walking through a field of rakes, but every time you step on one of them, your whole life gets reset. Like, a lot of these games start out fine, and by the end, it's like your butthole is dangling dangerously close to a very scary drill. They're vague and sometimes outright BS. Now, I know saying, old game hard, sounds like a massive skill issue, and you might be correct, but a lot of old games are short, and the reason why the stupidly hard ones are the way they are is that they were specifically designed that way to lengthen playtime. Because as we all know, if game short, then game bad. And hey, that argument is so strong that people still use it even to this day. But no, if like most of these games were at least like half as difficult as they currently are, then you could easily beat them in like an hour or two, and I guess that's not really a good look, especially considering how expensive they were. But while this might sound like crazy talk, I personally believe that prioritizing fun factor over the time it takes to finish the game would make for a more fun experience to revisit countless times. But hey, I've never made a video game before, so what would I know? Our current society could never survive the likes of the Lost Levels or, God forbid, Takeshi's Challenge. We are not built for the mischief that those two have to offer. They're like comedy acts where you're the punchline. They are both so unbelievably bullshit that I almost respect them on that principle alone. Because you know that nowadays nobody could get away with making a game like this unless it was like some guy making a troll fan game or mod. But anyway, that stupid hard design philosophy thankfully died a long time ago. And now, while naturally hard games still exist, I'd say most games nowadays are toned down in order to appeal to a wider wider audience rather than limiting the player base to people who pee in empty bottles of Sprite. And whenever a really hard game does come out, it's sort of advertised that way and also designed in a manner where it's still demanding but is very forgiving at the same time, if you catch my drift. Think of games like Celeste or Katana Zero that are hard but have frequent checkpoints. Difficulty selections are also a thing so that the difficulty of any game that has it can accommodate Super Gamer Sheep, who has 8,000 hours in the game, and still be accessible to people like my dad. I think my favorite thing about difficulty selection is how it opens up new ways of playing games I already enjoyed. I think of your modes like Ocarina of Time Master Quest. Now, I can't speak about the quality of the difficulty since I've only ever dabbled in it a little bit, but I think mirroring the whole game and tweaking dungeon design is at least a good concept on paper and adds replayability for hardcore fans of the game. At least it's Pain Mode, which limits each save point to one use so you can't save scum. Evil Within's Akumu, where you die in one hit. Pretty much any rhythm game, at least the ones I've played, are at their best on the highest difficulty, where every last note or sound is turned into yet another beat that will contribute to your premature arthritis. But killing my hand is worth it, because if those highest difficulties never existed, then the levels in these games would never reach their full potential. Try going back to an easier difficulty after playing on hard mode. It just feels like the song is incomplete, and I keep on messing up trying to hit notes that aren't there. The crown jewel of good hard modes in games for me, though, has to be Resident Evil 7's Madhouse difficulty. I will never pass up the opportunity to praise this mode because I'd love to see more games have a difficulty like this. Sure, it turns up the dial on enemy stats like other hard modes do, but it also specifically redesigns the game to make you approach every segment of it in a totally different way and catch you off guard at every twist and turn. And it adds even more careful decision making to a series that's really good at forcing you to make life or death decisions. It's great, and it upsets me that none of the titles that followed made a difficulty as good and creative as this one. Because 3 Remakes Inferno mode and Village's Village of Shadows are more so balanced around New Game Plus, yet can still be played on a fresh save anyway, and that just leads to total disaster. These feel like they're just there for streamer bait and toxic meme-filled speedrun categories. But if there's any sort of consolation, I think Professional and 4 Remake's pretty cool. I like how it removes autosaves, which makes S+ ranking it like one of the most insane challenges in the whole series. And yes, I did it without any sort of bonus unlockables, and man, it was pretty cool, except for whenever it wasn't. But also, on the other end of the spectrum, easy modes for dumb babies have been expanded on too. A lot of games nowadays have assist modes for my grandma that can at times make it borderline impossible for you to lose or get stuck, because I don't know about you, but I didn't spend $60 on this game to think about how to get past a group of enemies or a puzzle. I say, son, if you wanted to finish a video game back in my day, you had to cut out your left testicle and sacrifice your firstborn child to the gamer gods. Now, with that said, even though I've spent the last 2 sentences insulting them, I mean, if I have to be serious, they're really not something to get worked up over. As someone who's gotten to know a lot of people who aren't hardcore gamers and then watch as they struggle to overcome the simplest of challenges, I've begun to understand why modes like this exist. It's just to lower the entry point into gaming more, and if it means that a larger group of people can experience something I really like, then that should be seen as a positive thing. Because a lot of us have been playing games ever since we were children, and meanwhile, there are a lot of people nowadays who didn't grow up with games and are just now getting into them. And yeah, playing video games might be a lot harder than you think if you didn't grow up playing them. It's sort of something interesting to think about. Now, I'd never personally play in assist mode, unless we're talking about Yick, but that game is hard to play for other reasons. But I also don't think it's right to shame people who play games on the easiest setting. It's not cheating them out of a good experience, it's just helping those who are far less experienced get their foot in the door. I personally prefer it whenever an assist mode just makes the game a lot easier rather than like preventing you from dying altogether, because I feel like at least some challenge should still be present. And I must say, I think a bit of an unhealthy mindset is being developed due to these easy modes. There's this small subset of people out there with the mentality that there's absolutely nothing wrong with only playing on easy mode and that hard modes are for tryhards and like No. If you played a game on the easiest difficulty and really liked it, then there's no harm in trying to play it again sometime on a harder mode now that you have more experience under your belt. It'll probably help you appreciate and enjoy the game even more. While I'm all for easy modes and stuff, there's this weird anti-difficulty mentality that pops up every now and then, and I pray that it never catches on. Because whenever a game that doesn't have difficulty options comes out, it sometimes leads to a totally uncalled for disaster. After all, if you're used to playing games on modes that are more casual oriented, then what are you going to do when your new little toy doesn't have an option for casual players? Ew. Luckily for me, I have a much better idea, and that's to
complain about the game online instead of blaming myself for getting hit by that extraordinarily large pickle.
You know, I haven't played any FromSoft games before, like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, but I can tell by the general positive reception of their games that any dumb take talking about how their games are too hard hold up about as well as my opinion on Splatoon 3. The people begging for an assist mode for these games are completely missing the point. I mean, they're supposed to be ball-bustingly hard. I swear, this same discussion happens every single time a new Souls-like game comes out, and the day FromSoft caves and actually puts an easy mode in one of their games is when it's just over, bro. It reminds me of this thread I saw years ago, and you know, of course, I'm not going to find it, but still talk about this incredibly specific thing anyway, but it was a bunch of people talking about Cuphead. You know, you're probably familiar with Cuphead, the funny cup game that invented old cartoons where you fight a bunch of cool and wonderfully animated bosses. Anyway, Cuphead is really hard. I mean, not to me anyway, but it was hard to me at one point, and the game sort of sells itself on its difficulty, and the game has a practice mode that makes the bosses much easier. However, if you beat them this way, then you don't get their soul contract that you need to progress to the next area of the game. Essentially, the point of this mode is to just serve as a pair of training wheels to help you practice for the real bout. Good idea for such a tough game. So anyway, the people in the thread were complaining about how you couldn't beat the game by only playing practice mode, and I remember a few guys in particular calling the devs assholes for making it that way. Like, huh? How dare the devs don't let me breeze through a game that they spent years and God knows how much money carefully animating and programming so that I can throw it aside after 3 hours of playing and never touch it again. Man, these devs are assholes. I bet they piss on babies. Do people like that actually enjoy anything about gaming, or are they just there to look at flashing colors, press buttons, get patted on the back, and not think about what you just experienced? Because if that's the kind of game you want, then go play something like Bill Bunghole's Butt Blast. I hate how if a game nowadays doesn't have an easy mode or an assist mode or some other kind of accessibility function, there's always that one person out there who tries to make it out like the devs just hate accessibility. You know what? Let's actually talk about that word for a moment. I'm going up and say it. Accessibility and difficulty are not necessarily the same thing. The difficulty of a game doesn't necessarily limit who can and cannot play it. It can definitely make it harder for a lot of people to get into it, but does it outright prevent them from playing the game? No. Games are for entertainment purposes, but even entertainment is a time investment. And if you don't want to spend time learning how to play a game, then why did you even buy it in the first place? Most games do a proper job explaining their mechanics through tutorials or subtle design decisions that I think nowadays anybody can get through a game with just a little bit of patience. Now that I think about it, the patience thing might be an issue. I mean, that's something that a lot of us don't have anymore. And while a game should accommodate a player, the player in turn should try to accommodate the game, if you get what I'm saying. If a game only has like one difficulty setting and that option is too hard for you, then either adapt or stop playing it. Don't whine about it online because it doesn't click with you. A game that kicks your ass is not necessarily one that's poorly designed. If you can't handle it, then it just might not be for you. I mean, pretty mind-blowing, huh? Guys, I have a confession to make. I did not care for Super Metroid.
What?
I don't like the way it controls, and I found myself getting lost, and not in a fun way, it just made me want to look up a guide. And I'm someone who doesn't really need guides. I only ever use them to figure out if I'm doing something wrong or if the game is being a little But am I going to tell you about how Super Metroid is actually bad? No. It's not bad, and I don't think it's bad. I've come to understand over the past few years that I don't like Metroidvanias, and therefore shouldn't go around telling people about how bad they actually are just because they don't fit my taste. Have you seen some of the stupid crap that comes out of people's mouths? The fact that every day of my life I'm at risk of seeing someone who doesn't like RPGs have a bad take about RPGs is a violation of my human rights. Not all games are compatible with all people. It's an unfortunate truth, but I mean, it's part of human nature. Having different opinions, views, and tastes is what makes us the way we are. I'd love for as many people as possible to enjoy the games that I do, and I'm all for making games more accessible. You notice nowadays how there are a lot more options for colorblind people or settings to help people with other disabilities play a game that they otherwise would struggle to play? It's great, and I'm all for games including those options. However, back to what I was saying earlier, an easy mode is not a substitute for disability settings. I remember at last year's Game Awards, there was some award for accessibility in games where both disability settings and assist modes were being lumped in the same category, when in my opinion, they absolutely shouldn't. An option to make it where in-game characters solve puzzles for you should not be considered the same as an option that alters the UI to help deaf people play the game. And sure, obviously a puzzle solving mode could help a disabled person too, but I doubt that demographic was the first one that came to consideration when implementing that feature, unlike a colorblind or deaf mode. Because of these two very different things getting conflated, it doesn't surprise me anymore that there are people out there who genuinely believe that if your game doesn't have an easy mode, then you're cutting off accessibility in a similar vein as a public parking space removing handicap spots. Also, trying to argue that games that don't have easy or assist modes are made by evil developers who don't want less experienced or disabled people to enjoy video games makes no sense, considering that obviously if you're making a video game, you want as many people to play it as possible. I mean, actually think about it, gaming's still a business, and the stupidest thing to do in a business is to gatekeep customers. There are a lot of tryhards out there who do unfortunately like to shame people who play on easier difficulties, but a grand majority of other members of the community don't, and insulting developers because their game is too hard for you is childish. And well, it's actually pretty funny too. But okay, I guess I should clarify something. Fellas, I gotta admit, not all difficulty is good. That's right, I lied. I gaslit all of you into thinking that if someone is complaining about a game being hard, then they're just bad and need to get good. I fooled you all! But no, even though I hate a lot of discussion revolving around video game difficulty, I also think it's underutilized or mishandled in a lot of instances these days. I've played a lot of games, and because of that, I can catch on to recurring mechanics or understand how a game functions without having to be told much. I can sort of figure things out on my own if I get some time to play around with controls and whatnot. Because of that, I find while a lot of modern games are still fun, some of them are too easy and their difficulty options leave a lot to be desired. This might blow your mind, but easy, normal, and hard are surprisingly pretty vague terms, because while hard mode in one game might be genuinely tough, hard in another game might be the only not boring way to play. Playing normal in Silent Hill 2 was like, wow, why do I constantly have 50 shotgun shells in my inventory? Confronting my guilt isn't so hard after all. And then you go to 3 and normal is like getting 10-hour work weeks at McDonald's in Brazil. And yeah, that was normal, and on top of hard mode, there are other unlockable, even more challenging difficulties, starting with Extreme, Extreme 2, Extreme 3, Extreme and Raccoon, Extreme, the Aussie Tour. I almost picked hard going into this game because of how easy 2 was. And trust me, I'm so glad I didn't, but ever since then it has conditioned me into picking normal over hard on my first playthrough of any game I've played since then, regardless of how familiar I may or may not be with its style of gameplay. And whenever I do consider playing a game on hard mode or bumping up the difficulty if the game has the option, then I run into a garbage annoying section of the game that's made all the worse now because I've turned up the difficulty, so oops. So yay, I get to be stuck playing games on normal mode where they may or may not actually require thought to beat. Also, I just wish more interesting things were done with hard modes. Those other examples I listed earlier show that there's a lot of untapped potential whenever it comes to harder difficulties that don't just boil down to make enemy have more health. But devs just don't really want to do stuff like redesigning certain challenges to make them more difficult because it's hard enough to make games nowadays, and I guess just bloating enemy stats or increasing damage is the easier way to go. I can't really blame developers for not having more fleshed out hard modes in games, but that doesn't make the lack of them any less disappointing. Difficulty settings in hard modes are really good incentives to keep playing games I already like to get better at them and love them even more than I already do, or to make games I'd find too easy to a fault more entertaining. There's a lot of bad talk surrounding hard modes and video game difficulty in general, and it just makes me very upset. Because as I've gotten older, I've come to respect and appreciate well-made difficulty all the more, and I don't want to see that aspect of gaming get shafted or criticized in bad faith. Turkey, I think your game sucks. Big PP mode is a load of bullcrap. Can you just, like, make the hitboxes actually functional, please? But, Luggo, surely you understand that my family is in dire need. No, I'm not gonna hear any of your excuses, sir. I've had enough. I still tried to make something. I've written this script 5 times over the course of like a year and a half, and I think the difficulty I've had getting this video off the ground is quite fitting considering the topic.